I'm Melissa Cortina. I'm from the Anna Freud Center. I am a researcher, but I also run a lot of trainings for the Anna Freud Center, particularly one that is focusing on joint working between schools, CAMS, and all child and young person mental health services, including the voluntary sector. So what I'm hearing tonight is really encouraging news that there's actually a lot of joint working that's already going on here, which is precisely the direction we'd hope that you would be taking. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is resilience. It's a word that's very, very commonly used and tossed around. It's quite a buzzword right now, in fact. So there's a lot of definitions about it. So this is just a little bit of an overview. So I'm going to start with the definition, and then I'll get into some of the factors that influence resilience and mental health. And then I'll move on to why that's important. And then I'll start to touch on some approaches that you might take to promote resilience in young people. And I have some example frameworks for you and some examples of what has been going on in some schools that you might want to consider or take on board. They're by no means meant to be an end-all be-all or say that you have to be doing these. It's just to get you thinking, particularly in your workshops, around the type of things that you can be doing. I know that a lot of you work with young people in very different capacities and have different roles, so I just ask you to keep in mind how what I'm saying specifically relates to what you're doing. So I'm going to start with this definition of resilience. This is a really common one from Anne Maston. It's the maintenance of positive adjustment under challenging life conditions. So essentially resilience is a process. It's not necessarily something a young person is going to have or not have. So because of that, it is something that we can foster within young people. Some useful definitions. Risk is any factor or combination of factors that then increases the chance of an undesirable outcome affecting a person. Vulnerability is a feature that renders a person more susceptible to a threat. And protective factors are the circumstances that moderate the effects of risk. So I don't know how well you can see this. This is a list of factors that influence mental health. This is from a paper from Vikram Patel that's in the Lancet. And the important thing to note here is that there's a number of both risk and protective factors, and they span biological, psychological, and social realms. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. There's a lot of different things. So, for example, exposure to toxins, malnutrition, sexual abuse, are risk factors. Psychological factors could be learning disorders, maladaptive personality traits, a difficult temperament. And then on the other side of that, there's a number of protective factors, so things like age-appropriate development, good physical health, ability to learn from experiences, and good self-esteem. So there's a number of things there, but what I'm primarily going to focus on today is some of the the social factors that can contribute to resilience. So there's things within the family, within the school, and within the community that you can do to promote good mental health in young people. So when I talk about risk and protective factors, generally speaking, an increase in the number of risk factors results in an increased likelihood of a negative outcome. So the more negative things you're exposed to, the more likely you are to have a psychological problem or poor adaptation. But that being said, that's not invariable. So not all young people who are exposed to a lot of risk develop mental health problems. So what I'm particularly interested in, and I think all of you are as well, is what differentiates those who do well in the face of adversity versus those who struggle. And can those who struggle in the context of risk be supported to achieve better outcomes? And that's really the focus of what we're wanting to do when we're looking at resilience. And I think this is a helpful way of conceptualizing that. So, as I mentioned, that protective factors mediate the relationship between risk and outcomes. So typically, with an increase in the number of risk factors, you'd see an increase in poorer outcomes for children. But that relationship is mediated by protective factors, so that could be both internal characteristics or external characteristics. So internal characteristics being things like emotion regulation, problem solving, coping, self-management, and external relationships being supportive relationships, be that between parents and children, teachers and children, or some other adult or peer. Supportive structures as well, and that can come from the community, that can come from church groups, that could come from a wider family network. But the important thing to note is that actually these are all things that can be supported in some way. So we can help children learn better emotional regulation or problem solving or coping, and we can provide those supportive relationships and structures. So just thinking about some of the areas that do play a role in resilience, family connection, school connection, community connection, participation in both home and school life, as well as community life, self-esteem, body esteem, empathy, help-seeking, having goals, and support of peers. So keeping these things in mind, we at the Anna Freud Center use something called the Student Resilience Survey, and I'm not sure how many of you use outcome measures at all in your work. Anybody? Yeah, a few of you. What I'm not saying is that you should go away and use this resilience survey and assess resilience in young people. Rather, it's a good way of conceptualizing some of the things that do play a role. And in your work with young people, it could be a conversation starter. This might be some of the areas you want to pay attention to in dealing with young people in terms of thinking about what factors might be at play. Are they struggling, or might they need some help with resilience? It's a 2-page survey. It has very strong psychometric properties, so we do know that it is actually assessing the characteristics of resilience. So why is resilience important? That might be something that's on your mind. Essentially, it improves longer-term outcomes. So children who aren't resilient are at risk of not reaching their developmental potential. They have poorer educational attainment. They don't get as good of jobs in the end. They're at higher risk for both mental and physical health problems into adulthood. So resilience then can boost their chance of having positive outcomes, and it can then enable them to meet their developmental potential. So there's a few different approaches that you can take to promoting resilience. They can be risk-focused, asset-focused, or process-focused, but essentially the best method is actually a combination of all three. In my subsequent slides, I've focused mostly on the process-focused approaches and given you some ideas in terms of that, for example, strengthening relationships, but it's something to keep in mind. So just to reiterate that multifaceted programs that take into consideration the child, the family, and the community are going to be the most successful. And then programs that address risk and assets and resilience processes, along with focusing on relationships. So this is just a bit of a summary of what I've said. So also trying to promote young people's self-esteem and mastery, so how they feel skilled at different tasks, along with the provision of either nursery or school or community experiences. So one thing I'm going to propose here is that actually schools are an ideal site for promoting resilience, but it's quite important that this is not viewed in isolation. So I don't think schools are just the only piece of the puzzle. This is working with the voluntary sector, this is working with CAMS, this is working with any other group within the community, this is working with families, but schools can be a positive site for this. And any support from school staff has found to be a protective factor. And it can actually buffer the impact of things like parental hostility. And in particular, for young people who have very few other positive experiences, relationships within the school environment are particularly helpful at helping them to be resilient. So again, just thinking back to the chart that I showed you earlier, schools are a really good place for promoting protective factors. It's the place that young people spend most of their time. It's the primary context outside of their home, and there's actually research that says, it's been found recently that young people primarily go to a teacher or somebody in their school if they're experiencing difficulties. So it's a really good avenue to access them. And there's also interventions that can happen within the school, and they can be aimed at a variety of things. But that being said, whether it's in the school or outside of the school, it's quite important to note that not all interventions are useful. There's a lot of interventions out there that say, oh, we're going to promote resilience, this is our resilience kit, but actually a lot of them don't have any evidence base. So if I can kind of leave you with one strong message, it would be to be thorough and investigate what is the evidence base, work with those around you who might be more familiar with it, and look for what might be most suitable for your environment, but also is actually shown to have some effect, because it would be a real shame, given the limited resources, to buy in a program somewhere or roll out a program that isn't effective. So this is one example, and I'm sorry I missed out the heading of where this is from. This is something that's been done in Islington. It's a framework they developed called the Morris Framework. And Morris stands for Mental Health and Resilience in Schools. And I think this is just a useful diagram in showing how collaborative approaches can support resilience. So, at the top we have got the support for the most vulnerable groups, which actually, although it's not perfect, it's a fairly established section of it. And then there are systems as well for those particularly at risk. But what I've heard tonight is what you're trying to focus on is the bottom, so consistent approaches for all of the pupils. So trying to encourage resilience regardless of whether or not they already have problems. And so this just goes into a bit more detail. This is again from the Morris Framework, in terms of ways you can promote mental health and resilience. And so this is one of the things that I think you might decide you want to consider within your workshops in terms of what you can do in your area. But there's a number of things, be it from partnerships and relationships with parents, to school curriculum, to support networks, to training for staff. And so it's quite a nice conceptualization of it, and it might help you think of some of the things that you could be doing. So that being said, these are a few ways you could in particular foster resilience in young people, and this information is from the APA website, so you can go on and have a look in terms of what you can do. But it's quite important for young people to have connections, so be that with yourself or other young people, but really encourage them to get out and talk to people, meet people, connect with people. Helping others is another really good task. They feel like they're part of something, and actually it takes them outside themselves, and they feel a sense of achievement and self-worth from helping others. And that can just be as simple as doing a kind deed. It doesn't mean, a financial commitment in any way. And daily routine is really helpful, and I think it's something that can be underrated sometimes, the importance of having some structure, particularly for those who really need it. But that being said, it's also quite important to encourage them to take a break, so not having your life be so structured that you don't have time to have fun or enjoy yourself or do something that makes you happy. And self-care is very important, so things like exercise, eating right, looking after yourself. These are all things that contribute to positive mental health and resilience. Goal setting is also very important, so helping them to develop a achievable goal, a small step. It doesn't need to be a big giant thing, but something small that gives them a sense of mastery and success. And to also nurture a positive view. So things might be bad right now, but that doesn't mean they're always going to be bad. Things might get brighter in the future. It's maybe not as bad as it seems. In some instances, it might be as bad as it seems, if not worse. But that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. And it can be hard for young people to look into the future and see that. So that's where our job is, to really help them see that that's the case. And also have opportunities for self-discovery. They need time to themselves in difficult circumstances. You learn a lot about yourself, and they might find that actually they're stronger than they thought they were. And that change is part of living. They're not going to react the same way to something last year that they would this year, so there's things that they can learn from that. And so I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but this is also a helpful website. It's called Action for Happiness. And they have an acronym called Great Dream in terms of things that you can do to happier living. And so I've included the website there and some specific links. But so basically the great is things that are outside, external things that you could do. And the inside are internal things that you can do to be happier. And so part of this is resilience, but I just encourage you to have a look at this website because it has some really useful tools for supporting young people. And also I can echo your sentiment about MindEd is a really fantastic resource as well. Thank you very much.